The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time to stop into the Colonie Library. I'm using A Rift in the Earth by James Reston Jr. as a kind of starting off point for things that I think will be of interest to you, because they're not just historical, they relate to everything and so many things in modern day culture. I can't talk to you as a veteran like my older brother Sam, who served in World War II in Nazi Germany, and I can't talk to you as my childhood friend Dickie Hepler, who served in Vietnam and stepped on a landmine and lost his leg. But I can talk to you as a one of the lucky ones that James Reston describes in the book, who went for his physical at the height of the Vietnam War and was judged 1A or whatever it's called, and luckily, because of the lottery, I was not drafted. It was just what you would call fate. I could just as easily have been drafted, selected, and gone to fight just like my brother did. But this book is especially interesting, A Rift in the Earth. The title comes from the fact that Maya Lin, the designer of the memorial, was what I was telling Joe Nash. Her work of genius was that all 1,421 entries in the Vietnam Memorial competition went up. Hers went down, because you would think, oh, a memorial, it has to be grand, it has to go up vertically, and she did, for whatever reason, instinctively or just artistic judgment, went below ground, but not arbitrarily. This is an important point. Many times you see a design in art and you can't understand it, and so it's very often done only to get publicity. It's either shocking or it's so different or whatever. But this was not arbitrary. There was a reason why she wanted to go below ground, because her sentiment and her symbolism was that this rift in the earth was a rift in the fabric and in the heart and soul of the United States. It was an open wound that she hoped would heal over time, which to a great extent it has. Now, we don't have time maybe in a course, much less this little presentation, to talk about the history and the politics and so on of the Vietnam memorial competition. But what I'm hoping to do is kind of provoke some thought about what you think memorials should achieve. And as a jumping off point, I brought these panels by way of showing my experience in designing national memorials to illustrate the two pieces I did, and then show after that where this would be going. This panel on the left side shows a 10-foot bronze monument inspired by Roots, the baptism scene in Roots, which is overlooking Dr. King's tomb in Atlanta, Georgia, at the King National Historic Site. And I, in 1980, had presented Mrs. Coretta Scott King with a small casting of this piece, which is taken from the baptism scene in Roots. It's a ritual that the slaves brought over from Africa and then recited when their newborn children were in the United States. And talked to Mrs. King and Daddy King, who's Martin's father, about one day doing this as a 10-foot piece overlooking Dr. King's tomb in Atlanta. And they shared a vision, but said, we don't commission pieces, you have to raise the money. So for the next 10 years, I raised $500,000 independently. And in 1990, Mrs. King, John Amos, who played Kunta Kinte in Roots, and I dedicated this piece at the King National Historic Site which is seen by 1 million visitors a year from all over the world. And it now overlooks Mrs. King's tomb by her wishes at her passing in 2008. Her tomb was put next to that of Dr. King's, and it's above ground in a reflecting pool on a concrete island. So you see both of them in view of the monument. Very, very beautiful. And yes, please do.
What was, you said the ritual, baptism ritual in Roots? I'm not familiar with that.
Well, one of the central scenes in Roots and of the Alex Haley story was that when children were born to slaves in the United States, African slaves, they would recite an African ritual of holding their children up to the heavens and saying, "Behold the only thing greater than yourself, because the only thing greater than you is God himself. So have dignity and pride." And they repeated that ritual for each newborn child. So as an artist, when I saw that, to me, I saw it as a universal symbol, not just for blacks, but what father doesn't have hopes for his son or daughter that he or she will live a life better than they lived, and also with great dignity that will not be overcome by diversity or whatever. That's a universal sentiment. And very often people ask, why is it a white guy doing this piece for a black? I didn't see it. Whether I'm an artist or naive or whatever, to me it was universal. And it's proven to be so, because when I go down there and meet so many visitors from around the world, black, white, every background, no one ever says it's a black piece. To them, it's universal. So, but that has its long history. What Maya Lin went through with the Vietnam War Memorial, you can multiply by 10 with what I went through, in the sense that you're introducing, well, the same way that Maya Lin was criticized, and terribly so, and stereotyped as an Asian, as a gook, most terrible stereotype of language, I too found myself in the same position of having to defend why, as a Caucasian, I was doing this piece. It was either presumptuous or are you black or whatever, but then also, when this piece was finally dedicated in 1990, thank goodness I got a lot of publicity and promotion, because that's what you work for as an artist. That's what helps your career to thrive, is that people get to know you. So I was grateful for that. But I also became very well known, I guess, and important to a group that you may have heard of called the Ku Klux Klan. And so when I returned to my little Hell's Kitchen apartment in Manhattan after the Spigmont Valley, I started getting these letters and phone calls from Ku Klux Klan and other races. And they said every mean-spirited thing you could think of and every ridiculous thing you could think of. One of my favorites, as Joe knows, is, did you know that Dr. King and John F. Kennedy both had the same parents? Now me, I'm a very positive thinker. So I'm thinking, if we could ever capture the DNA of these parents, we could produce a race of supermen and superwomen overnight. You know what I mean? We don't need it. We'll do it genetically. And so I wanted to thank the writer for sending me this historical information. But you're not going to believe this. There was no return address on the envelope. And as an old English major and teacher, I thought that was very impolite, And as were all the letters, none of them had return addresses. They had postmarks from all over the country, not just the South. But so anyway, that gratitude will never be expressed. So anyway, there was the fundraising and all the politics that went into this, and because it was an independent project, how did you get this? Well, the one who suggested it. And so so many things defensive. But in the long run, just like I think the Vietnam War Memorial, it is a very extremely positive, inspirational piece. Now, tying this monument to my left more closely in a comparison to the entire Maya Lin experience, this is the Eagle Rock September 11th Memorial, which I designed and started designing 1 month after 9/11, and I was selected by Essex County to create this memorial. And so I designed this 160-foot granite wall and 8 bronze sculptures overlooking, even though it was in New Jersey, it was overlooking the Twin Towers. This was the actual position and size of the Twin Towers. And on the morning of 9/11, there were thousands of people who congregated here and actually watched planes going around and watched the whole thing in disbelief, of course. So that too was its own challenge, because people would question the figures. They would question, why did you do this? Why did you not do this? Some senator, U.S. senator, got a note that this piece called Remembrance and Rebirth, one of the bronzes I did, which is looking toward the former site of Twin Towers as a symbol of vigilance and remembrance. The senator got a report that one of the pieces I was doing for this memorial was a lawn jockey. Okay? So the senator and the assemblyman came to my studio. They knew me, and they came to the studio in New Jersey where I was doing the pieces, and they just started laughing when they saw the piece. They said, well, we had to come. It's politics. Well, just like Maya Lin's politics. Because if it were not for politics, this book might have never been written. Maya Lin would have won the competition fair and square, and had a brilliant idea. It's conceived and then executed, and that's it. But the politicians get involved, the public gets involved, both good and bad. I'm not using politicians, who I very often refer to as legislators, in a pejorative way. That's part of their job, that's part of what happens, and the public too has its sentiment. So what happened when the veterans saw that Maya Lin's design had no American flag, it had no soldiers, it had no implements of war. It was just this black granite with names on it. It looked like a tombstone. It was black when all the other memorials were white. So the concept of color came into thing, and in a most emotional way, because as an artist, Maya Lin could easily explain why the black granite was reflective, why it had all certain properties that lent to the monument, whereas many people could not understand it. So what started out as a noble venture for the monument got very highly politicized. And the veterans in particular, and for good reason, objected. Why, where's the soldiers? This is just, it has no feeling. It's, it's minimalist, it's depressing, whatever. And it went on for months and months and months, years of people protesting and expressing their opinions, rightfully so. One of those types of debates that, had an awful lot of merit on both sides. But I think, luckily, time sometimes has a way of getting the truth and having things reach a good compromise. People now see that monument as a work of genius, and one that truly expresses the sentiment most important in the Vietnam War, as it did with this Eagle Rock Memorial, because with all its the 8 bronze sculptures, which I hope have a beautiful sentiment and expression, and the wall and so on, the heart and soul of this whole monument, the heart and soul, without which it would be nothing, is this, the names. Just as the Vietnam War Memorial, heart and soul, was not any soldier, not a flag, it was the names. Because if one looked at the essence of what makes, in my mind, a memorial, what we're memorializing is not really the war, we're memorializing the loss of life. And in this case, particularly difficult because it was a war that did not have an easy definition like World War II. That was easy. We had a dictator killing people for no reason, just whatever, nationalism. Vietnam War, very, very complex. We went in with the best of intentions, because the North Vietnam Vietnamese were threatening the South Vietnamese government, which is democratic, and they had a domino theory, which didn't seem so outlandish even to this date, that if one country goes, so does Cambodia and Laos and so on, the countries around it. So we entered the war with the best of spirits. Those soldiers went in as very noble soldiers, maybe some of them reluctantly, but they were fighting a good war. But as they say about, victory has a million fathers, but defeat is an orphan. Well, as soon as it became evident that we were not winning this war, that no one was winning it, all of a sudden it didn't become so popular. And for reasons of morality and reasons, I think, sometimes of cowardice, so many people who just flew to Canada, we had the protest against the Vietnam War. So when the memorial came out, people asking for all these things to be added to it, and eventually they did compromise and add a flag and the 3 soldiers, which is beautiful, beautiful work of art by Thomas Hart. Beautiful work of art. And it does indeed enhance and give a real humanity to the monument. The thing that endures are the names, because when you walk along that wall and see 58,120 names, all of them young men, mostly, maybe a higher officer, and then you look at a tremendous loss of life, your question is, why? What did we gain from this war? What was it that made us enter the war, and what are we immortalizing in a monument? And it is indeed the names. And so to this present day now, when people go to the monument, they are not as critical of the fact that there's not a lot of flags and there's not a cannon or guns or whatever. That really says it all. And Eagle Rock ended up the same thing. The sculptures I did, I hope, will enhance the contemplative spirit and dignity of the experience of seeing this monument, a place of healing, a place of renewing and moving on. But if you removed all the sculptures, those names alone would justify the design of that monument. It's all alphabetical, left to right, 2,500 names of everyone who perished in the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the 4 airline flights. I believe the only 9/11 memorial in the United States that has everyone's name on it. I think Ground Zero has only 2011 Twin Towers and 1996, and just the names. But when you look at those names, as you're moving along and you see 15 foreign nationals among them, you see people of every race and religion, and you look at the Falkenbergs, alphabetically 48 and 2. If those were the only names, you would see the senselessness of terrorism. And you see how stupid and pointless it is that people should die that way. And so hopefully when I designed the monument, it was mainly a place for healing, a place for helping people to move on from a cycle of grief to a cycle of renewal and rebirth, which is basically a subtitle of the Eagle Rock Memorial. Now, I'd like to find out from people who are gracious enough to come today, what are your thoughts on the Vietnam War Memorial? If you were given the ability to design that memorial or to add to it, what do you think? Would you add things to that monument, either in figurative pieces or some statement or whatever? Or what do you think? Yes.
I'd leave it alone.
Yeah.
Jan Scruggs, who was the driving force on this business, sent out mailers to all the Vietnam veterans in the late 70s and early 80s about what he wanted to do. And if you were crazy enough to send in $5, which I was, I now have a friend for life.
Right.
35 years later, I'm still on his mailing list. Okay? And I know nothing about art. I can't tell the difference between blue and green. So, to me, the jury selection, fine, lovely. Let's do something. I wanted something. I wanted something. And that's basically what it was, just give me something. And of course, then it just bogged down so quickly into the politics and the blatant racism, which was obvious to anybody.
obvious, yeah.
They don't want to admit to that. No one wants to admit to that. But it turned out to be, it's iconic. You go to Washington now, it's iconic. It's like it's been there forever, and it hasn't, of course. And it's just a powerful, powerful piece of work.
That's a testament to a beautiful design that what I call enters the American mainstream. It's timeless. And it's funny you mentioned about the racism, because I had submitted a design, but when it was announced Myelin won it, I always thought, and I'm very big on, I do a presentation on American mass media and how it can help you or hurt you in terms of stereotypes. And I thought I would give $10 for a photograph of the committee people's faces when they opened up this design, and it was not only Asian, it was a woman. How about that? That's not coincidental that every single monument in Washington is done by Caucasian male, and certainly not Asian. It's always European, Northern European, whatever. And all of a sudden it comes through. And then I read this book, years later, and sure enough, that everybody was shocked when this happened. So God bless America. We have a lot of faults, but our main virtue is we have the ability to change and improve. And this young woman back here was next.
I think it's perfect in its representation that we are a melting pot, this country, and the fact that it's a woman and an Asian lends to that theory. And also, it's so stark, the message. It's not about a battle, a certain battle. It's not about a general or anybody, individual or president or anything. It's all about the names, the people that were killed in Vietnam. So I think it's just perfect, and it shouldn't be touched. And at first I thought, oh, that's odd for a sculpture. But then I thought about it, and I thought, no, she really drives the point home.
And the genius of having people experience not only intellectual reading of names, but they are physically going below ground. That was a work of genius. You feel yourself descending, and when you get to the lowest point, you are at the highest point of the war, and then as you keep walking, then you are elevated. Work of genius. I don't care if she first designed it in her mashed potatoes, which the book said. I don't know if that's true, but I had heard that story before. Yes, I think that someone over here, yes.
When I went to Washington years ago, I went to see the memorial. And when I approached it, it just looked like black marble, black granite. And I was kind of disappointed, but then when I went down in it, I was totally immersed and engulfed in such a terrible loss of life and the ramification to family and friends, and it really moved me. It stayed with me. I think it's powerful.
You can look at sculptures and get some idea and some emotion and sentiment, but when you look at names that are lost for reasons of what you're not certain, and so young, that's very difficult to take. Very, very difficult. I'm sorry. I think you were next, and this young lady. Yes.
What is it, the Vietnam Women's Memorial and the 3 soldiers that commemorate the Vietnam
Right, the Thomas Hart.
War.
Yeah, the soldiers, beautiful, wonderful work of art. They really express a human sentiment. They're not soldiers charging forward, killing. You could look at that sculpture and just think all really deep ideas about the meaning of war. And I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say I've been there twice. Also, the Effect Academy was both peaceful and somber. But what always strikes me when I go there, and you could go there with having a full understanding of that war and what happened, or you could go there having very little understanding at any age, is the stories that unfold as you observe what's going on with other people at the people of all ages. You see somebody with a cane trembling to get over to the wall. You see people with a piece of paper doing the rubbings to find their loved ones' names. You can still, at any day, you can see people leaving notes, flowers, little vases. The stories continue, the loss continues. And to me, that's very powerful. Both times that I was there, and others have told me this, they experience this.
Sure. Yeah, it is powerful. And if you walk away with no other lesson about war, is that win or lose, it's a very, very heavy price. There's no such thing as a war without casualties. Yes?
Recently, this past summer, I went to Bolton Landing with my son, who's a social studies teacher, and they had a mock-up, well, I should say, half-size Vietnam memorial with Mile and one. So even though I had seen it in Washington some years ago, it gave me a close and immediate revisit. And this time, my son was explaining to me something else that I never know about the design of the monument. And that is where the two pieces come together. That it spans the entire, I think, 30 years or something of the war, the beginnings of it, until the first person who died and the last person who died.
Right, it's chronological.
Yeah, and the way it goes, first goes this way, and the last goes this way. So the first and the last come together right at the crease. And I didn't know that. And I thought, wow.
I didn't either. I didn't know that.
Yeah, what a design.
I thought that it ended
59 to 75. She started.
left to right, 59, 75?
She started with the first two men that were killed
Right,
in 1959.
When they
And
were-
those are the names that are up, and it says 1959. And then, like she says, it runs all the way this way, and then it comes back this way. And then at the end is 1975, which is when we withdrew. And that's the last
what they
name.
call the vertex. Is
Yeah,
the
so
architecture.
she's got the beginning and the end, and
Yeah.
you can get that whole biblical Alpha and Omega thing.
Sure,
And,
sure.
And she did that 59
Yeah,
to
just
75.
the physical sensation, the physical experience of looking and moving and so on. It's something you experience in so many different ways. It was work of genius. I just
One of the things that I enjoyed, one of the things that I appreciated was the lack of rank. Just the individual's name. There's
very
no
much so.
discussion of Staff Sergeant Smith or Lieutenant Johnson or anything like that. It's just
it's so funny you bring up that too, because in terms of using these as a shared experience and jumping off point, when I was doing this memorial, there was a question of how do we list the names, all right? And the $1 billion committee at Ground Zero was wrestling with the same thing, all right? How do we list the names? And, well, you know, we can't put the chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald next to a busboy who was working at Windows on the World. I mean, my God, that would be disgraceful, all right? So that was people's logic. At Ground Zero, they were arguing, some people, that, you know, we should put the terrorist names on the wall too, because they're victims. They're victims of brainwashing and so on. So we should, next to Joe Smith and Mary Doe, we have the terrorists. So that became a question too of what names go on the monument. How do we arrange them? It gets so complex. But what I was telling Joe and others, if anything is to be learned, at least technically, from this Eagle Rock Memorial, people wonder, how did you get this? It's a major memorial, the only one in the United States I know that has all the names on it, Twin Towers, Pentagon, and the 4 airline flights. How did you get this done in 1 year? Because I won the competition in October of 2001. In October of 2002, it was dedicated by 700 families in New Jersey and elsewhere who had lost loved ones. New Jersey lost, I think, almost half of the 2,500 people because they're in a commuter line. So they came into the World Trade Center a lot. So So anyway, so this commemoration of the names, I think, sets things in a logical fashion, and one that kind of, I hope, endures. I'm hoping, like the Vietnam War Memorial, that even to this date, now it's 16 years later, people still go to Eagle Rock, and still it's a place of healing and remembrance, and hopefully renewing their faith. Because for me, a monument, one of the main purposes of a war memorial, or any memorial, is to renew your faith in yourself, in your country, and your respect for humanity. If it does nothing else, and the fact that heroes were not listed by rank, there's no rank here. There was no soldiers. There was no CEOs. There was no legislator. It was simply alphabetical, because let's face it, in death, in a terrible tragedy, we're all equal. So, yes, please.
Go back to the night, and I was curious how she responded to the controversy and some personal attacks on her.
Well, what I found fascinating. Well, so yeah, okay. You're probably like me. I didn't really know anything about her personally, but it turns out she had quite a temper, and she was very hard to work with. And even the book says it. People just said outright, she's very difficult to work with. And this was also her weakness, which you might call a weakness. It was also her strength, because she was so embattled by all the people with design changes and so on, that had she not been such a person, this Vietnam War Memorial would have never looked like this. In fact, even one expert sculptor told her, listen, Mylin, I've done major architectural things and monuments, but once you sell them, it's gone. And what happens to it is very often nothing like what you got paid for. And for sure, that was what's happened with this. You can bet that if she did not hold her ground and refuse to compromise on her black granite, on the V, on the fact that the flag was not going to go at the top of the vertex, and I don't think it did. Yeah, and that the soldiers themselves are not going to be featured in the middle where the veterans wanted. They're going to be off at an entrance way, a little bit of ways from the memorial itself. If you didn't hold that, you would have seen a line of flags, you would have seen tanks and guns, and you would have seen all this stuff, which maybe for World War II had some sort of sentiment, because it was indeed a just war. But for this, when you look at the loss of life on both sides, would not have been appropriate. So her personality actually worked in her favor on that.
What were some of the things that they wanted to have her change?
Well, first of all, not so much change, but additions. They wanted to see the human figure. And I don't have a problem with that, because the Thomas Hart soldiers are expressed in a beautiful fashion. Their facial expression, their pose, and so on does indeed give a real humanity to it. They wanted a giant flag at the vertex where the two sides meet. They wanted maybe some sort of military implements there, maybe guns or a cannon or things like that. And you could see one of those arguments or debates in which both sides are right. If you're a soldier fighting in Vietnam and you gave up your life, or you lost you saw friends lose their life, you lost a limb, tremendous psychological damage afterwards, and then the sentiment is just the names, but where's the humanity? You take that quite personally, and they did. So it's not a criticism. What I think is the best testament to it is that when they say time will tell, that you look at the Vietnam War Memorial was dedicated in 1982.
35 years later.
Okay, 35 years, and then the Hart sculptures went in 1984. That to this day, I think you would find very few people who would say, oh, I don't like it at all, they should have done this, shouldn't have done that, because they just, as you experience the memorial, you just see how that attests to the correctness of what was done. And it doesn't glorify the war, and it doesn't criticize it, really, not the war itself. It's just, I don't know what the lesson learned is, except that don't go into war unless you absolutely have to. It is not a John Wayne type of let's go in and get rid of these foreigners and let's not, it's always a loss of life. And now, of course, it's almost academic because, God forbid, if there ever is another major war, there won't be any battle lines. There'll just be a few missiles, and in about 45 minutes, all over. There might be a few winners, if you can call them winners, survivors. That's it. So the lesson learned, I'm hoping, is what Trump is doing in North Korea, or what he's being forced to do, by these very irrational leaders, is to make some sort of stand about consider what you're doing, because there's no, just like I think Reagan said, there's no winners in a war anymore. There's no winners. And you just don't know if these people are saber rattling, just trying to get the populace behind them by showing how strong we are by threatening the USA, or if they're serious. But because we're in a push of a button warfare, we don't have time to really do much analysis. We really have to show people that war at this time is an end game for everyone. Yeah.
What does the book actually cover? Does it talk about the process?
It does. It's very fascinating, especially because I had entered the contest, and you always wonder, as you enter these contests, who are the jurors? How do they do it? Well, it turns out that we had to submit 2 panels, which I think were 20 by 30. I think they were like this, about like that. 2 panels that had your design on it, and anonymous. You couldn't have a name or anything that indicated the gender, the affiliation, or whatever. Which I don't know, had its shortcomings too, because these were professional jurors and they must have recognized a lot of styles that, oh yeah, I know who that guy is, I know that girl is, okay? But that's neither here nor there. So they took these 1,421 entries like this, and they brought them into a Air Force hangar, and they put them on easels, which I think went over a mile, if you can imagine a mile of these eagles. And after they set them up, some pilot started a jet airplane, and the backwash blew them all down. So it was a hangar, So anyway, they got over that. They set them all up again. And then the jurors, who seemed like pretty good representation, I thought that the jurors were mainly like Northern European and white and thing, but they weren't. They were kind of a good mix, which you'd say, okay, artistically and ethnic, racially, whatever, they had a good mix. Although I don't think there were any black. And so they walked around these things for I don't know how many days until they kept winnowing it down, and they finally came down to, I don't know what it was, 10 or 20 that they thought, these are the finalists. And they, according to the book, they kept returning to this watercolor that Maya Lin did. It was basically just, if you took a piece of paper, watercolor, and splashed blue, and then you just splashed a black slash, that was her design. That was it. But they emphasized, if rightfully or correctly or not, that her text explanation of what the monument was very moving and very appropriate. So anyway, that's as far as I can tell, or what the book can tell you from what they did. And there was a few questionable things about one of the entrants worked for one of the companies for which the juror worked or something. It was like how could there not be cross currents from professional? It's impossible for you not to. It's one fishbowl. It always is, no matter what your thing is. But other than that, and it was pretty fair-minded. And like I say, here I am as an entrance telling you that I didn't deserve to win. That Maya Lin design was a work of genius. It really was. In its simplicity, which I've learned, that was one of my lessons in competitions, make it simple, okay? And it was ingenious in terms of what her symbolism was, and her courage and obstinacy in not compromising the design itself. So that was basically how it was done. And
Some of the entries like columns and.
oh, they're brilliant entries. It wasn't for lack of brilliance. There's a few in here, and there's a few that I know of. I mean, they're brilliantly composed, imagined, executed in the panels, and so on. They had, they had columns. They had all sorts of different things where you could touch a name. It was brilliant. But there's something which in competitions of any sort, I would offer as a suggestion. Keep in mind that there's the people who are judging this competition are people. They have families. They have good days and bad days. They're impatient. They have things on their mind. And there is a certain point, and this touches even on juries in criminal trials. They get impatient. And after a while, they start gravitating toward whatever is simplest and easiest. So in my mind as an amateur psychologist, I think that was part of it. That after you're looking at 1,421 entries times 2, that's 2,800 panels. After a while, you just say, okay, this is brilliant. These are all sorts of different things to answer your question, Joe. I mean, water elements and different media and so on. You start going toward the simple. And you could see how myelins would all of a sudden in their brain go, oh, yes, let's put this in the mix. So, yeah, it was amazing. Just the intelligence and the talent that went into that competition was remarkable. It's remarkable. Yes?
I was wondering if the book touched on myelin at all, her story, whether it was, I don't believe she had Vietnamese background at all.
Chinese.
She's Chinese.
Chinese, yeah, but,
Yeah.
but even still, was there something about this monument particularly that would stir her and create a soul?
No, she,
Unless she was being less than truthful, she seemed not to care at all about politics, and from the get-go did not want to make it any type of political statement. Her parents immigrated from China. Father was a teacher, and mother, I think, a professional person, and they moved to Seattle, where they met, got married, and then they moved to Ohio, which, stereotypically in American movies, Asian Americans always live in Ohio. Well, I can't think of any that come to mind, but you know how the stereotypes are, okay? And they own a laundry or a restaurant, which she alluded to, and it was a lesson for her, real harsh lesson as a nice protected little student in Yale, junior in Yale, where everybody is civilized and PC, even before PC was invented, and all of a sudden people are referring to her as the Asian girl as, quote, the gook, okay, which is nigger, kike, whatever, that's just as offensive. It's a terrible, terrible phrase. And referring to her publicly as that, and to her face, all right? And all of a sudden now she has to deal with that she's, which all of us I think very often go to in a certain extent, are we just plain American, or are something American? What are we? But that was very, very prominent, and in a way, luckily, that it was anonymous entry. Because if they ever saw myelin on the entry, that would have been number one. And now let's do the other 1,421s. Okay, I'm being a little sarcastic, but they could, they'd say, "Wait, we can't have an Asian and a woman doing this national monument when 58,000 men died. Why not? What? Pardon me?
And 10 women.
And 10, thank you, and 10 women. We can't have this done, but why not? When it comes to things of imagination, creativity, sensitivity, and art, it's gender neutral. What difference does it make? What difference should it make? But if you look at monumental commissions in Washington and everywhere else, they're almost totally dominated by males for whatever reason. So that's it. Yes?
Who was on the jury? How did you get to be a juror? What were the qualifications?
Well, they came to me for permission. Then I had to review their resume. No, it's so hard at the highest levels. What is merit? What is cronyism? It's very hard to separate it. I don't care if it's politics or academics or the art world or Hollywood. What does it read? Well, if you look at the names of the jury, they were brilliant men. As far as I know, there were no women, but they were all men, and but very diverse. There was a sculptor from Argentina. There was an Italian, Cesare Pelli, and there was, I think, Scandinavian. I'm talking about the backgrounds, and I think English, German, and so on. And they were all had tremendous resumes and very credible background. Pardon me? I think there were 8, if I recall the book. I think 8. They were hung jury, and then I don't know. No, I don't know how it eventually came down to. They all had a consensus at the end. Okay, here it came down to like 3. It was Hart, and then there was Myelin. Hart was third, Myelin was first, and then there was a guy in the middle. I can't remember his name. Came down to 3, and then, if I recall correctly, the announcement was, it was almost like the Heisman Trophy. I think all 3 went to the announcement, and then they announced she was the winner, I think. But that's neither here nor there. But she was number 1, and Hart was number 3. And Hart had an in right from the get-go, so much so because he was designing the Washington Cathedral. He was a well-known, well-respected artist, and he was a brilliant figurative artist, who was the opposite of Myelin. He was pure figurative, Michelangelo, the Renaissance, and believed in that without. And Myelin was the opposite, a minimalist, modern-day artist. All right, so they were at opposite poles. But because of his position as number 3, and because the veterans wanted this figurative piece, somehow, whatever, they then selected him to do the figurative piece. These same 8 people, of course, with tremendous pressure of politics and veterans organizations and so on, who really wanted a figurative piece. So who was the jury? It was probably 200 million people on the jury, okay? Because one way or another, they all expressed their opinion that we want a figurative piece, we want the best we can get, and Hart as being the best you can get, and also number 3 was natural. So that's...
Well, who was the person or people that decided who would...
That's a good question. That's a good question. When it started, it was almost like some people were just declaring themselves as a jury.
It started with Scruggs.
Yeah, with Scruggs.
He kind of put it out there. He doesn't know that much about art.
Don't expect him to. It's not
So he just kind of put it out there, and one guy contacted another guy. And
Exactly.
it was all volunteer, and it just kind of morphed.
Who's Scruggs again?
Scruggs is a Vietnam veteran who just decided that we needed a monument. And he was the single driving force starting after the Iran hostage crisis, if you remember that. And he decided the Vietnam veterans needed a monument. And he started the whole thing. And it's basically, that's his monument. Jan Scruggs is. And the thing has become, she was talking about those little things that are left at the wall.
Yeah.
They have filled up warehouses. Literally filled up warehouses, and the National Park Service runs the warehouses now. This has gotten huge. You talked about that wall that travels.
Yes.
And there's a website. You can find out the story of every one of the guys on that wall. Everyone, easily now. It's just become, it's huge. It's just, and it all started out with Jan Scruggs watching these guys come home from Iran, and they got a parade. And it just started from there. It just rolled.
Were there any veterans on the jury?
That's the irony.
No.
One World War II veteran.
Oh, yeah.
And that frosted a lot of veterans.
And why no African Americans? They were disproportionately represented.
No women, no men.
But you can go on forever. I can only say that you can't undo the past. I'd love to undo slavery and what we've done to Native Americans. It's impossible. But what we can do as a country, and it's our strength, as I mentioned earlier, is we have the ability that, although we started with so many imperfections, with George Washington owning 200 slaves, and getting married, and when his wife died, he had 300 slaves because he inherited her slaves. And our presidents owning slavery, and we have 365 treaties made with the Native Americans to protect their land, of which all 365 were broken almost immediately. Okay? How can we can't undo that. But what we can do, I hope, and we're doing like crazy, in fact, I'm kind of feeling it in some cases in my detriment, is that we now have a movement that's getting more and more united for women, gays, ethnic, whatever you want to call it, which is a stupid term, everybody's ethnic, who's not Native American. But in which case they're getting more and more represented in juries, in corporations, in committees, and so on. It's kind of going overboard, and I have to remind my women friends, because I go to a lot of women's business council meetings and so on, because women's education is one of the main missions of what Morelli Art does, is that when I grew up, there was an old boy network. That old boy network was just about 100% Northern European Caucasian, okay? There were no Irish or Jews or Italians or Poles or anything in there, okay? And I was not part of that, okay? So I grew up in that, and I remember how long it took me before I started to see Italian Americans in places of prominence. I grew up in even though my neighborhood was Italian, Irish, Polish, and German, in the world, the legislators and everybody else was not those things. But now they're changing. And I'm seeing, going to women's events and hearing speeches and reading articles, I'm saying now, I see what you're doing, which is excellent. My question is this: are you trying to build a diversified, new age thing in which everybody's equal by gender and so on? Or are you trying to build an old girls network that is identical to the old boys network? Because when I look at the old girls network that's following, and I look at the names up at the top, the ones who are writing the books, the ones who are leading the charge, the ones who are getting the jobs, geez, it looks surprisingly like a gender change from the old boy network. But it's still, now it's an old girl network. Please don't forget what your goal is. It's supposed to be, everybody's supposed to be equal in this. And I'm sensing already some things that I think I'm just the wrong gender. But I'll bide my time. Maybe in 10 years, it'll move over to the guy side, But I'm happy.
The boys network hasn't gone away. It's still thriving.
It's thriving, but it's changed. It's changed big time. It's no longer Northern European, Old Boy Network. Old Boy Network, if you look at everything from president's cabinet to heads of major corporations and so on, it's astonishing how diverse that has become.
President's cabinet?
Oh, yeah.
Diverse?
In terms of ethnicity, yes. Janet Napolitano, who's now head of UCLA, she was, what was she, Homeland Security? Well, no, I'm not going to judge a single administration. I'm talking about the trend from, let's make up a date, from the 1960s to the present. Things have changed big time. Presidential cabinets were strictly Anglo-Saxon, strictly. You never saw anything there. Now you see Secretary of Defense, black, Southern European, Asian, God bless America. This is our strength. So my point is, let's not try to worry so much about the past. It's done, it's not great, nobody loves it, okay? But build in the future, now that we have a springboard with media and protests and so on, to make America what it's supposed to be. Not just great, but what it's supposed to be, okay?
All right, well, thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Joe. And we can talk afterwards, want to chat, and please come up and take some brochures and stuff. They're interesting to look at, I hope. And if you want to chat or whatever, thank you very much for your time. I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.